Chapter 12: The Internal Distortion. Every system can identify failure outside itself. Very few can identify the distortion they introduce. This asymmetry is not accidental. It is structural. External fault is visible, defensible, and socially acceptable. Internal distortion is quiet, destabilizing, and identity-threatening. As a result, most breakdowns are diagnosed accurately everywhere except where they originate. This chapter examines that origin. The reflex to look outward. When instability appears, attention moves outward almost immediately. Individuals point to circumstances, pressure, or other people. Organizations point to markets, competitors, or regulation. Institutions point to external shocks, political opposition, or historical constraints. These explanations are rarely false. External factors are always present. They are rarely sufficient. External explanations account for triggers. They do not explain persistence. They describe what happened, not why correction keeps failing. When deterioration continues despite effort, the cause is usually internal. Why internal distortion is hard to see. Internal distortion develops gradually. It emerges through small accommodations made for convenience, continuity, or comfort. Boundaries soften. Exceptions normalize. Responsibility diffuses. Each adjustment feels reasonable in isolation. No single change appears destabilizing. Together, they alter the internal geometry of the system. Because distortion develops incrementally, it rarely activates alarms. Systems remain functional while coherence erodes. The system still works. It no longer works cleanly. Distortion without intention. Distortion does not require bad faith. Most distortion is produced by well-intentioned decisions repeated without recalibration. Actions taken to reduce friction, preserve harmony, or maintain momentum accumulate unintended effects. Intent remains positive. Configuration drifts. This is why collapse often surprises sincere systems. They did not intend harm. They did not perceive deviation. Intent does not prevent misalignment. Identity as the primary barrier. Internal examination threatens identity before it threatens structure. To recognize internal distortion is to accept that one's self-image may be incomplete, that competence may have masked misalignment, that success may have delayed correction. This recognition is uncomfortable. Systems protect identity reflexively. They defend narrative continuity even as internal relationships weaken. Structure is sacrificed to preserve self-concept. Certainty is distortion amplifier. Certainty feels stabilizing. It reduces ambiguity. It accelerates decision-making. It simplifies interpretation. When certainty hardens, it becomes distortion. Signals that contradict certainty are filtered. Feedback is reframed. Dissent is treated as disruption rather than information. The system becomes predictable. Predictability is not stability. The role of self-justification. As distortion accumulates, systems generate justification. Outcomes are explained through necessity. Deviations are rationalized as temporary. Violations are framed as unavoidable. Justification preserves momentum. It erodes alignment. Over time, justification replaces examination. The system becomes adept at explaining why recalibration is unnecessary. Correction is postponed. Internal distortion and feedback collapse. Feedback depends on visibility. When distortion increases, feedback weakens. Signals take longer to travel. Interpretation becomes selective. Information is filtered to preserve coherence of narrative rather than accuracy of configuration. Eventually, the system hears only what confirms itself. At this point, internal correction becomes impossible. When this is ignored. When internal distortion is denied, systems experience correction as hostility. Constraints feel imposed. Consequences feel unfair. Outcomes appear disproportionate. The system attributes pressure to external aggression. In reality, it is encountering the accumulated effect of its own configuration. The illusion of moral immunity. Moral confidence often accompanies distortion. Systems that view themselves as ethical, necessary, or benevolent assume their intent offsets misalignment. They interpret critique as misunderstanding. They dismiss correction as opposition. This confidence is dangerous. Moral framing replaces structural analysis. Responsibility is reframed as virtue. Examination is avoided. Distortion deepens under protection of righteousness. Responsibility and self-examination. Self-examination is not self-blame. It is structural inquiry. It asks where responsibility drifted, where capacity was exceeded, where authority detached from consequence. It does not assign guilt. It restores coherence. Systems that confuse examination with blame avoid both. They preserve comfort at the cost of stability. The cost of avoiding internal correction. Avoiding internal correction does not avoid correction. It transfers it. When systems refuse to recalibrate internally, pressure accumulates externally. Correction becomes less precise, more forceful, and harder to control. Internal correction is always cheaper. External correction is always harsher. The difference lies in timing. Why distortion is normalized. Distortion often becomes normalized because it does not immediately disrupt function. Outputs continue. Metrics hold. Performance appears acceptable. This apparent functionality masks declining coherence. The system confuses operation with health. By the time dysfunction becomes visible, internal capacity to respond has already weakened. The quiet role of self-deception. Self-deception is rarely deliberate. It emerges from repeated avoidance of discomfort, from prioritizing continuity over recalibration, from choosing explanation over examination. Over time, systems forget that alternatives exist. Distortion becomes invisible. Distortion is misplaced load. Distortion often reflects misplaced load. Responsibilities accumulate where capacity cannot absorb them. Decisions concentrate where feedback is weakest. Pressure is distributed unevenly. This imbalance produces stress fractures. Self-examination relocates load. It aligns responsibility with capacity. It restores balance. Avoiding it concentrates pressure elsewhere. The threshold of recognition. There is a threshold beyond which distortion can no longer be examined internally. This threshold is not defined by scale. It is defined by refusal. When systems consistently reject signals that challenge identity, internal correction shuts down. External enforcement follows. The quiet alternative. Some systems remain stable for long periods. They do so by examining themselves before being forced to. They tolerate internal discomfort. They allow identity to adjust. They separate examination from blame. These systems are not free of distortion. They address it early. Self-examination is structural capacity. Self-examination is not introspection. It is capacity. It determines whether systems correct internally or are corrected externally. It defines whether adaptation is gradual or abrupt. This capacity must be maintained deliberately. It does not emerge automatically. The misinterpretation of confidence. Confidence is often mistaken for health. Systems that appear decisive, unified, and certain are assumed to be stable. Confidence can coexist with severe distortion. The absence of visible doubt is not evidence of alignment. Why distortion persists until crisis. Distortion persists because it is rewarded. It reduces friction. It accelerates decisions. It maintains narrative continuity. Crisis removes these rewards. By then, options are limited. The structural role of humility. Humility is often treated as moral virtue. Structurally, it is openness to correction. Systems that tolerate uncertainty retain adaptive capacity. Systems that reject it harden. Humility preserves relevance. Closing constitutional statement. The most dangerous distortion is not opposition. It is the belief that distortion exists only elsewhere. Systems fail not because they are attacked, but because they refuse to examine the contribution they make to their own instability. Internal correction is not weakness. It is the last expression of sovereignty before external enforcement begins. End of chapter 12.